Today you become an ancient Roman vestal virgin, a woman of the sacred fire. At 7, the Pontifex Maximus took me from my father's hand into the temple of Vesta, and at 16 I swore before all Rome a 30-year vow of chastity to guard the eternal flame. I was born in 35 AD into a senatorial family on the Palatine Hill in Rome. My father Marcus Sulpicius had already served Emperor Tiberius in the Senate for a full 20 years before my birth. The night my mother bore me, cold rain fell on the Palatine, and she clutched a small bronze statuette of the goddess Vesta on the birthing couch, quietly praying for a healthy daughter. When I was 4, Emperor Tiberius died suddenly on the island of Capri, and my father sat all night in his study by an oil lamp writing letters to sound out the temper of the next master of Rome. In the spring of 42 AD, when I was 7, the Pontifex Maximus Emperor Claudius himself came into our atrium to choose the next little vestal to enter the temple of Vesta. Claudius walked up to me and raised his hand and spoke the captio formula of taking, and from that moment I no longer belonged to my father's house or to the Palatine Hill. On the morning I left, my mother removed the small golden bulla amulet she had tied at my waist in childhood and quietly pressed it into my sleeve, saying it would keep me safe. On the day I entered the temple of Vesta, the elder Vestalis Maxima Aurelia herself cut off all my long hair with bronze shears and hung it on the sacred lotus tree in the inner courtyard. For the first 10 years I was an apprentice. Each dawn I drew sacred water from the spring of Juturna and walked around the eternal flame, reading the same roll of parchment scripture over and over. When I was 12, my companion Unia grew drowsy on the night watch and dozed off. The sacred fire shrank to one thin line of red embers, and the whole temple stayed awake the entire night. The Pontifex Maximus himself flogged Unia with a fresh laurel rod, 300 strokes in all, and from that night on I dared not close even half an eye for fear of failing the flame. When I was 14, the Pontifex began assigning me alone to the midnight watch, saying that when I tended the flame, even the rhythm of my breathing was steadier than anyone else's. In the spring of 51 AD, when I was 16, I was formally chosen as the next vestal to take the vow, the decisive year between apprentice and full priestess of the sacred fire. On the day of my vow ceremony, the whole Roman Forum was packed with citizens watching, and Emperor Claudius himself draped upon me the heavy white woolen suffibulum veil. As the words of the vow left my throat, my mouth went dry, and I swore before all Rome that for 30 years no man would be allowed to come near my body. When I was 18, I presided alone for the first time over the Cerealia festival of the grain goddess, and cast the first handful of new wheat into the eternal sacred fire with my own hand. When I was 20, I attended a consular inauguration on behalf of the temple, and the consul himself stepped aside at the threshold so that I might enter the Curia Senate Hall first. In 56 AD, a condemned gladiator knelt before my carriage as I passed, and pressed his forehead to the stones, and by ancient law I raised my hand and pardoned his sentence of death. That year the story of my pardon spread through all of Rome, and many senators sent their young daughters to the temple gate begging the elder vestal to choose them too. When I was 22, I began to manage the temple's properties, and senatorial wills and contracts came under Roman law to my hand for me to sign and seal personally in wax. When I was 24, Emperor Nero held a banquet on the Campus Martius to honor the senators, and the head of the long marble couch was kept by ancient custom for me alone. At that banquet, Nero declared before all that I was Rome's purest daughter, and pressed with his own hand into my sleeve a small gold aureus stamped with the Vesta flame. My father too rose to praetorian rank in the Senate on the strength of that favor, and from that day no one in Rome dared to slight the Sulpicii household even a little. In 61 AD, when I was 26, the emperor handed me the bronze seal of the whole grain dole, and from then on I personally signed and stamped relief decrees for the city of Rome. When I crossed the forum, the senators stepped down from their litters to make way, and even the praetorian prefect would unbuckle his gladius and hand it to an aide before passing me. In July 64 AD, when I was 29, the great fire struck Rome. The flames reached the temple gate in a single night, and I rushed out clutching the bronze reliquary of the sacred fire. At Nero's court, the powerful Tigellinus said I had been slow to save the flame, and he summoned the elder Vestalis Maxima Aurelia to publicly explain why the temple had been neglected. Tigellinus's brother-in-law had been blocked 1 year earlier by my father in the Senate over a large grain decree, and from that moment, he had been watching our whole family closely. He sent his clients through every street to spread the rumor that on the night of the fire, I had not been in the temple at all, but in the residence of a young equestrian on the Palatine. By 65 AD, the city of Rome began to whisper that I had broken my vow of chastity, and at every street corner the criers shouted that single accusation over 100 times each day. Nero sent the Praetorian Guard that very night to ransack the Sulpicii atrium, and they carried away every grain decree my father had ever signed, roll after roll, for verification. They confiscated every grain contract and every sestertius from my father's coin chest, and they even seized by force the pearl brooch my mother had brought as part of her dowry. The guard brought me from the temple to the Golden House on the Palatine, and Tigellinus made me kneel before Nero himself and account for my whereabouts on the night of the fire. I gave the details of that whole night word by word, but Nero only waved one hand and ordered me back to the temple to await the formal inquiry of the Pontifex Maximus. Back at the temple gate, I found the elder Vestalis Maxima Aurelia sitting alone weeping on the marble steps of the inner court, the formal imperial decree of inquiry already in her hand. In January 66 AD, when I was 31, the Pontifex Maximus opened the formal inquiry, and every sister of the temple was brought together under guard into the Golden House Judgment Hall. Tigellinus produced 3 witnesses, an equestrian's household slave, a night watchman of the city, and the third was my childhood sister in the temple, Licinia herself. Licinia kept her head bowed and said that on the night of the fire she had seen me leave the temple by the rear gate, her voice trembling so much she could barely hear herself speak. Only then did I understand that 1 year earlier Tigellinus's brother-in-law had quietly cleared the entire 3 million sestertii of debts and interest of the Licinian family. After 3 days of inquiry, the Pontifex Maximus pronounced sentence in open court that I had broken my vow, and by ancient Roman law, I must be buried alive on the Campus Celeratus. My father stood outside the great hall biting the edge of his sleeve, unable to speak one word, and my mother collapsed on the marble steps and was half carried into a side chamber by 2 maids. 3 days later, the Praetorian Guard placed me in a closed white wooden carpentum drawn by white oxen, and by ancient rite paraded me once around Rome to the Campus Celeratus in the north. In the newly dug small stone cell at the Campus Celeratus, they set out only an oil lamp, a jug of water, and a single round loaf of bread, by ancient custom to let me starve slowly. I knelt in that stone cell for 7 whole days without touching the loaf, and on the 8th day Emperor Nero himself appeared at the open hatch and called out the single word halt. Nero proclaimed before the people that the perjury of Tigellinus's brother-in-law had now been uncovered. All charges were withdrawn, and he ordered me lifted at once back to the temple. When I returned to the temple gate, the sacred fire was still burning, and the elder Vestalis Maxima Aurelia tied the white woolen belt about my waist again with her own hand. In 68 AD, Emperor Nero took his own life, and that same night Licinia walked alone into the chamber where I kept the flame and pressed her forehead to the marble floor in silence. I did not say a single word. I only removed the small golden bulla amulet my mother had given me and placed it gently into Licinia's trembling open palms beside the flame. Only then did I understand that the sharpest blade in Rome was neither the Praetorian gladius nor the Pontifex's rod, but one single sentence that 10,000 voices can chant in unison at a street corner. This is the life of one Roman vestal virgin, and if you too have ever lost everything because of one rumor, please leave a comment. Next episode, you choose A Mayan human sacrifice priest or be a Byzantine palace eunuch. Vote in the comments. This work is fictional dramatization for entertainment only.